Chanukkah Sameach, everybody. We have an amazing shiur in front of us that discusses what's been on everybody's mind for the last several months, where the first time ever we're seeing an identity crisis in the world. After 2,000 years of being tortured by the Christian church, we have a group of Christians from the Black Hebrew Israelites, the Messianic Jews, Jews for Jesus, and all types of Christian groups telling us that they are the real Jews. And the question we're going to answer today is, does the Torah prophesize about this? What do we do about it? And finally, what's the solution? Enjoy it. I look forward to hearing your feedback. And BeEzrat HaShem, na'aseh v'natzliach. Hashem na'aseh v'natzliach, Shiur Torah, Bruchim Havayim. We're back here on Chanukkah, Baruch Hashem. Going to do a special shiur that's off of our, take a break from our series on the Jewish intimacy for this unique shiur that's really relevant to our times. In fact, it's a discussing a prophecy that is very relevant to what's going on in the world today. And needless to say, it has to do a lot to do with Chanukkah. Tonight's shiur will be for the Refuah Shlema for Rabbanit Levana Bat Sarah, Rav Ephraim ben Shulamit, Rabbanit Sarah Bat Anat, Avi Mori David ben Esriya, Imi Morati Doris Bat Jora, and also for the Atzlacha Rabbah and all the success for all of Am Yisrael, all the righteous Noahides that Baruch Hashem continue to support what we do here at BeEzrat HaShem. Baruch Hashem, the movie Gehinnom has certainly affected quite a few lives. I've already had plenty of messages. I don't know the number, but plenty of messages from people that have watched the movie, with the exception of one person that that didn't like it and stopped watching after an hour, or at least they claimed they watched an hour. Everyone else called it a life changer, and obviously the one person that said they stopped watching it after an hour is obviously a person that doesn't want to change. So watching the movie would actually force them to change. But Baruch Hashem, the feedback has been amazing. We still haven't reached even a fraction of the people that we need to reach. We need to raise as much money as possible and exert as much efforts as possible. So anyone that wants to contribute to that campaign can go to gehinnom.com or gehinnom.org and donate over there. There's a campaign. There's interesting offers over there. Also, we still have our raffle for anyone that donates to the Gehinnom campaign. It enters an automatic raffle to potentially win a $500 talit and a custom BeEzrat HaShem bag, a tefillin bag and a talit bag. We already have a couple of winners. We posted the picture of one of them last night on our channels for anyone that wants to see. And BeEzrat HaShem will continue announcing new winners as we get them. So as far as the campaign that's going on, also a reminder for people that are specifically located in the U.S. Tax season, is only a few months away, and one of the biggest things that people always regret is not donating enough money. Not only because of the mitzvot, but also because of the tax benefit that you have. Because in so many words, if you don't donate the money, you end up having to pay taxes on it. So when you donate money, you could obviously have a major tax benefit. So donating to our organization is a tax write-off. Specifically for U.S. donors. Other countries obviously have to deal with their own tax laws. I know certain countries view it as valid donations for tax purposes. Others don't. Everyone has to go to their accountants for that when you're located out of the U.S. because we're a U.S.-based organization. But we are only a little more than a week away from finishing off the year, the fiscal year. So this is the time where people have to make their biggest donations if they want to get those benefits. Either way, with our cause, I think that a person that donates wins regardless, simply because you're both getting a mitzvah and you're getting a tax benefit. But this is something that some people need reminders of. This is the time to do it. Some people I know donate literally 90 or even 100% of all of their donations during this time. Other people donate throughout the whole year, so they don't necessarily hold this time as anything unique. So just a reminder for everybody. Now the shiur tonight is going to use quite a few sources. We see from the prophets, when the Rambam in Shmona Prakim discussed the issue of prophecy, the whole aspect of prophecy, we see that the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu is as clear as day when the writings of Moshe Rabbeinu in the 5 books of Moses are easy to understand as far as the basic meanings of them, especially once you see the commentary by the sages, but the language itself is very clear in comparison to when you look at some of the other prophets, whether it be Isaiah or Jeremiah or Zechariah or Yecheskel or some of the other prophets that followed after. And the Rambam simply says that this is based on the level of the prophet, and their prophecy is how clear their prophecy is to them as well as to others. So of course, we're not prophets or sons of prophets, and our review of an unfolding of a prophecy that's in the books already is certainly needs as many sources as possible to make it as clear as possible, because this is something that's a very big deal in the world today. And certainly a person that would pay attention to it will see how much it affects their life. Sometimes in the beginning it may sound like it doesn't affect your life, but I promise you that it certainly does. Every single person that's watching, it's affecting your life. Now, the important thing to know is that because there are different sources, there are different books that I'll bring, it's going to be a little bit more of a built-up shiur where there's going to be a lot of different back and forth. So if you're not paying attention, if you're using this as background music type of shiur, I highly recommend you skip the shiur and you go to some of the more simple shiurim, because it's not necessarily going to be too difficult. It's just going to be impossible for you to follow without actually paying attention. So, BeEzrat HaShem, Hashem will give us the words to say it clearly, to say it in a way that everyone understands and applies it to their life. Now, the news today announced that the crime in New York has gone up 37%. Anti-Semitism in the United States is the highest it's ever been. The situation around the world as far as hatred of Jews has simply become a norm. You have a world that is comprised of many people that hate the Jews, but yet we have an anomaly, something that's unusual happening in the world, especially over the last 40 or 50 years, something that never happened before, where hatred of the Jews is one of the tools that Hashem has in creation in order for us to remember that He's our God, He's our Father in heaven, He's our protector, but also He is the one that's going to remind us when we need to do tshuva, sometimes by using anti-Semitism. Now, when people ask where was God during the Holocaust, the very honest and Torah answer is that He was clearly there because He's the one that made the Holocaust happen. Why? Because if you look at what the Jewish people as a nation were doing before the Holocaust, you see what the prophecies were in the Torah of what would happen when we would do those things, you see that the things match exactly. All of the curses of Parashat Bechukotai or Parashat Kitavo in the book of Deuteronomy happened during the Holocaust and during the other pogroms and inquisitions and Holocaust that preceded it. But needless to say, one thing we've had throughout all of the generations is the hatred of Esav on Yaakov. Of course, Ishmael also hated the Jews and also tortured the Jews throughout the generations and are certainly taking the dominant force of hatred of the Jews in our current generation. But needless to say, the situation in the world today is different. And the difference is that in the last 100 years, but especially in the last 40 or 50 years, the hatred has many times turned into a battle, a different type of battle, where After 2,000 years of torturing us, Jewish people, after 2,000 years of killing us, after 2,000 years of doing everything possible to destroy the Jewish people, there are many followers of the Christian New Testament, whether it be the black Hebrew Israelites, or just simply the Hebrew Israelites that are not necessarily always black, or it would be the Jews for Jesus, or the Messianic Jews, or all of the other types of sects and cults that are within that category, suddenly have decided that they are the real Jews, they are following the real Judaism, even though their book is different than ours, even though their belief is different than ours, even though they believe in a person turned into a god, or God having an image, God having a physical body, or God having intercourse with a woman, and all types of strange beliefs. But needless to say, these followers of the New Testament have taken it a step further. Throughout all of the years, they tried to convert the Jewish people to their beliefs, to the point where they would simply murder Jews in the most gruesome ways possible, in order to encourage the others to convert, whether it was the Spanish Inquisition or other things that happened throughout the years. Throughout all of the years, the Christian church has tortured the Jewish people. Obviously culminating with things like the Holocaust and the Spanish Inquisitions and other types of pogroms in England and Europe during the 1100s. But needless to say, that hatred has always been there. That is part of this world, this battle, this exile, this living in the diaspora, this living in a world where we're needing to do enough tshuva to allow the Mashiach to finally come, because he certainly has not come. But yet, the church has changed its ways in such a fashion that in these last 40 or 50 years, it's changed its approach to the point where it's now telling us that their people are the real Jews in some cases, or what's happened recently with the black Hebrew Israelites. They're not only considering themselves the real Jews, but also they consider all of the Jews that are really Jews, the ones that follow the Torah, the ones that put on tefillin, the ones that observe Shabbat, the ones that are circumcised, the ones that keep kosher, the ones that observe the laws of the Torah as far as Yom Kippur and Pesach and everything else, the ones that have been doing it for 3,300 years, those, they're calling us the slaves, Edom, and the Gentiles, and all types of names, where in essence their whole approach is to obviously call us the fakers, the thieves, and all of these types of derogatory names. Now, of course, the world is confused by these Hebrew Israelites no less than they're confused by different types of Christians that claim to be Jews, and no less than it's been confused from different types of other people that are claiming to be the real Jews, the real Israelites, even though they don't really follow any of the laws. The question is, where is this coming from? Why would they want to change their approach? I mean, perhaps their approach over the last 2,000 years got old, got stale. It's not in the fashion anymore to simply kill people anymore. Not that we're recommending it. We're just, again, questioning the whole change. Why this change? Now, you can say this change is more effective because, quite frankly, in the last 20 years, there was a research done that showed that over these last 20 years, more than 500,000 Jews converted to Christianity as a result of this new missionary approach. But again, not all missionaries and not all Christians and not all people that claim to be Jews are actually missionizing the Jews. Many of them, that especially the ones that are in the news every day now, the Hebrew Israelites are claiming that the Jews of today are completely fake. The ones that are in Israel, the ones that are in America, the ones that are all over the world, they're not even real Jews. Now, of course, we know that our Torah has everything in it. Afochba ve'afochba dekulaba. The Mishnah in Masechet Avot says, delve into it and delve into it because everything is in it. Now, can we find this whole situation, this identity crisis, in the Torah? And in fact, not only can we find it, but it was actually one of the prophecies, one of the things that's going to happen before the Mashiach will come. Now, this is going to be a stepping stone process, and we'll see how this all is built up, because it's not necessarily just people from the church. There are, of course, also natural-born Jews, or some people that have converted to Judaism but just went off their rocker, that have also are part of this whole issue. And the Midrash Tanchuma in Parashat Vayera, in the 5th section, has a prophecy that was again said many years ago. This Midrash Tanchuma was published somewhere around 800 years ago or so, 1200 years ago or so, 1300 years ago. So it's in the 8th or 9th century. And the Midrash Tanchuma says something that, if it's said today, makes all the sense in the world. But when it was said 1200 years ago, 1300 years ago, or at least written 1300 years ago and said many years before that, it didn't make any sense, because during the time that this was written, the pogroms and the inquisitions and the blood libels of Jews were simply standard. The destruction of the Bet HaMikdash was just a few hundred years before that. The massacres of many Jews was happening on a regular basis throughout the entire world. We had to move from place to place as a part of life, not necessarily because of new ambitions for a career, simply for survival. Now, this midrash is telling us something that's so unusual that anyone that reviews history will see how unusual it really is. And the midrash says exactly what the problem is today. The midrash says that a prophecy that the sages have brought after the issue that happened with the Greeks many years before, 1,000 years before that, more than 1,000 years before that, during the time of Chanukkah, meaning that the prophecy that is being reported here is more than 1,000 years old at the time it's being written here. But this particular prophecy is, to us, breaking news. We've discussed it. We've brought it in under the Shiurim, but if you look at the world today, it makes everything very clear. And the prophecy is as follows. In the future, the nations of the world will usurp the Torah and proclaim, "We are the true Israel." This is what the prophecy says. That unlike historical reality, where everyone hated us and murdered us and raped us and did everything possible that they can do just to torture us and destroy us, while Hashem removed them from the world and we're still here, Baruch Hashem, still needless to say, that hatred is still alive and well, but it's transformed. And it's actually transformed to such an extent where the Midrash says that one day they're not going to express their hatred in the same fashion. One day they're not going to try to annihilate you in the same fashion. One day they're not going to try to obliterate and destroy the Jewish people and confuse in the same fashion, but rather they're going to do something new, something completely unorthodox, something the opposite of reality, the opposite of logic, which is they're going to say that they are the real Jews and not you. Not you that have suffered this exile, not you that have been put on tefillin every day, not you that observe Shabbat every week, not you that has circumcised your children at 8 days old, not you that have observed the holiness even during times of intimacy, something completely unbeknownst and incomprehensible to the Gentile nations that are observing the laws of the New Testament, or the lack of laws of the New Testament, or the Quran, or anything else outside of Judaism, because intimacy and holiness completely contradict each other in their minds. So instead of you being the Jews, they claim to be the Jews. This is what it's going to be. Now, this all started at the time of Greece. But when? Why? How? How could such a prophecy be? Now, one of the things that we learned from our sages is that the prophecies, if someone predicts a prophecy that's a negative prophecy and it doesn't happen, doesn't necessarily make them a false prophet. But if they predict a positive prophecy and it doesn't happen, then certainly this is a problem. But of course, there are many other intricate details to determine whether someone is a real prophet, false prophet. The Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin talks about the determining the laws of prophecy, who's a real prophet, a false prophet. If they're a false prophet, it's a death penalty. But there are certain things that people can do that's false and still not get the death penalty. Needless to say, here we have a horrific prophecy that is coming true. And it's coming true at a time that we've already known is the time of Mashiach. It's the time before the Mashiach will arrive. And it's becoming more and more real. Now, during this time of Chanukkah, a couple of thousand years ago, the Greeks did everything they possibly could to destroy the Jewish people, but not the same way that the Babylonians and the Assyrians did, but rather by destroying the Torah. The main battle of the Hashmonaim, the Jewish Talmidei Chachamim, the Jewish scholars, that decided to go to war with literally a few swords they put together against the biggest, most massive, most powerful army in the world. Them with less than a minyan of less than 10 people going against an army of millions. Why? To fight for the Oral Torah. To fight for the sake of preserving the Oral Torah. Because the Greeks weren't against the Written Torah. They said, Written Torah has interesting stories in it. The forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Moses, all of these people, the characters, they're all interesting. And the Oral Torah is what ruins it. Why? Because this Oral Torah, it explains what these verses mean in such a fashion where it tells you how to apply these laws, and these laws contradict the way we want to live our lives, and therefore the Greeks did not like it. They did not like the fact that there is a God that's watching at all times, and not unlike what they thought, which is a God that created the world and simply left. They did not like the fact that there is a judgment. They did not like the fact that there is details for every single thing that you do in life and an accounting that you have to pay for it. And of course, the battle against the oral law went to such an extent where the Greeks implemented a law where the Jews were forbidden from studying Torah. And when that wasn't effective enough in their eyes, they made sure that the bottles, the baby bottles, which in those days were horns from animals, like the shofar, each bottle had a engravement on it, I don't believe in God, or I don't have a share of the God of Israel anymore. So to make sure that the little child would see these words while growing up on a regular basis. So by the time they became an adult, the Greeks believed this would have enough of an impact that this kid will not end up practicing his Judaism. And all of this was, in essence, to fight against the Oral Torah. And that's, in essence, what the Hashmonaim were fighting for. During this time of Chanukkah, the tiny band of Torah scholars, recognized as the Hashmonaim, decided to go and sacrifice their life, because there was no rational way of actually winning the battle. Sacrifice their life for the sake of the Oral Torah. Now, if you look at the world today, the same people that are fighting the Jewish people, whether it's to missionize them and bring them to convert to the idolatry of Christianity, or it's the ones that are in the news recently that are claiming that they're the real ones and we are supposed to be Edom and slaves and so on, are fighting in essence the same type of battle, but just in a different way. They're in essence, they're fighting against the Oral Torah. They hate the Oral Torah. They hate the Talmud, or also called the Gemara. They use it when it's to their convenience, or at least they think they use it. But needless to say, the Oral Torah has been the enemy of the Gentiles, enemy of the heretics, enemy of anyone that hates the Torah, even if they're born Jewish, throughout all of the generations. But why does everybody hate it so much? Why do people hate the Oral Torah so much? Why? I mean, you're not going to find so many people hate the Written Torah. In fact, you won't even have as many people hate Hitler's book as you do people hating the Oral Torah. Because the Oral Torah is something unique. But what's so unique about it? The Rav Hutner, in his Pachad Yitzchak, tells us the different details of the Oral Torah as it pertains to that time of 2,000 years ago, the fight against the Greeks. And one of the biggest things that we learn here is that the Oral Torah is in essence the way that Am Yisrael learns how to sanctify itself, how to become holy, and how to observe the rest of the law. Now, when a person disregards the Oral Torah, there's a certain outcome. There's a certain outcome of that. In the Gemara, Masechet Shavuot, we have an example of something that happened that will give us some details or things that we can learn from. In page 41b, it says, there was once a man who said to his fellow that he was lending money to, when you repay me back this debt, repay me in the presence of two witnesses who teach Mishnah, who teach the Oral Torah. The part of it is called Mishnah. Later on, when the time for the loan was due, the person that borrowed the money repaid the lender the money, but there wasn't two scholars next to them that teach Mishnah, so he just gave him the money. The lender lost the money. And then he went to the Beit Din. The head of the Beit Din was Rav Nachman. And he says to Rav Nachman, I am suing this guy for the money that I lent him. I lent him, let's say, $10,000. And we had a condition that when he gives it back to me, he has to give it back to me with two Torah scholars that teach Mishnah. And when he did give it back to me, he just gave it to me. So I took it as just me holding his money until there was two Torah scholars, because there wasn't at the time. But since I've lost it, I want the money. He has to pay me again. So Rav Nachman, one of the great sages of that time, says to this person, wait, so you admit that you received the money from me? You received the $10,000. He says, yes, I received it, but it didn't meet the conditions that we had. We set conditions that you had to have these two witnesses that are Torah scholars that teach Mishnah. So Rav Nachman paskins that since you admit that you received the money, it's considered proper repayment. But if you want to stand on this issue where he has to meet the conditions that you said about having these two scholars, no problem. Go bring the money that he gave to you, because you were holding it. Go bring it, and me and Rav Sheshat, my chavruta over here, we are two Torah scholars that have taught Mishnah, have taught the Sifra, the Sifri, the Tosefta, and the entire Talmud. So we fit this description that you want. So bring the money that he gave you already, and we will be the witnesses. Now, of course, he was, in essence, the guy was creating an excuse in order to get what he lost, but in reality, it's his fault that he lost it. And Rav Nachman was answering him in that fashion. But we have here an interesting thing, where Rav Nachman tells him, you wanted a Talmid Chacham, you wanted a Torah scholar, I'm a Torah scholar. Rav Sheshat is a Torah scholar. What makes us Torah scholars? We learn the Mishnah, the Sifra, the Sifri, the Tosefta, and the entire Talmud. Fine. Now, if we now go to the Gemara in Masechet Megillah, we see there's another story about Rav Nachman. The very same Rav Nachman that we just talked about. But this time it's a little different. On page 28b, says that there was a certain Torah scholar who has learned Halacha and Sifra and Sifri and Tosefta that died. And people came to Rav Nachman and told him, Kvod Harav, why don't you say a eulogy for him? And Rav Nachman says, how could I eulogize this person? That he was a sack that held a bunch of books? That he was a basket full of books that was lost? But wait a minute. If we see here, we see the guy was a Torah scholar that died. And we all know that it's very important to honor Torah scholars. And Rav Nachman doesn't seem to be honoring him, to say the least. In fact, he's just simply calling him just a basket full of books. What did this person learn? We see here. Sifra, Sifri, Tosefta, Halachot. Isn't that the same thing that Rav Nachman learned? Well, there is one thing different. Or in fact, there's two. In the list that Rav Nachman said in his Bet Din, when someone asked him if he's a Talmid Chacham, he said, yes, I learned the Sifra, the Sifri, the Tosefta, and the entire Talmud. And also, he mentioned that he has someone that he's learning with, Rav Sheshat. So from there we learn that there's a significant difference in these extra few details. Where on one hand, Rav Nachman says, Talmid Chacham, yes, we fit that description. Why? Because we learned all of this body of Torah plus the Talmud. And I have somebody to learn with. My rabbi, my chavruta. This other person that just died, yeah, he learned a lot of things. But he was a loner. He studied by himself. He didn't have a rabbi. And in fact, he didn't even learn the Talmud. So although he learned a lot of books, all he became was a basket full of books. I cannot consider such a person a Torah scholar. Now, this of course seems odd. But let's go further. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot gives us a little more detail. On page 47b, it says, the rabbis taught in a Berita, Ezeu Am Haaretz. Who is Am Haaretz? Am Haaretz is an ignoramus. Someone that's ignorant of Torah. So much so that at the time of the Gemara and throughout many of the generations, they wouldn't even count him in Zimun when you would do Birkat HaMazon. They wouldn't consider him as someone that's valid, as someone to be part of a blessing. And there were a lot of ways that they would treat this person as simply not part of the Torah scholars world in any way, shape, or form. Of course, they would try to help them learn Torah, but so long as this person remained an ignoramus, you cannot be considered in the same caliber. But needless to say, we have to know, what is this Am Haaretz? Who is considered an ignoramus? Today, every second Joe out there is making a YouTube video claiming to know all knowledge and all things. Today, every person that read 3 or 4 books consider themselves well learned. Today, every other person thinks that if they read something and they understood it and therefore they can teach it, even though they're not really sure if they really understood it. Needless to say, if the students that are listening to them, or the listeners and sometimes victims that are listening to them, are actually qualified enough to even learn from them. Now, here we see that the Gemara gives us details. Who is this Am Haaretz? Who is this ignoramus? Who is considered an ignoramus? This doesn't make them a evil person, a mean person, a murderer. No, it's simply knowing where you stand, where I stand, where everybody stands. What is an Am Haaretz? The Gemara says, the others, which is Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, say that afilu kra v'shana v'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim, even if one read the scripture, meaning the Written Torah, and studied the Mishnah, but he did not serve Torah scholars, arei zeh Am Haaretz. He is an Am Haaretz. And Rav Huna says, this is the halacha. So what do we have here? Someone learned the written Torah and even learned the oral Torah, but he did not serve Torah scholars. What does it mean he didn't serve Torah scholars? He didn't ask them questions. He didn't try to be next to them as often as possible whenever the opportunity allowed. He didn't double check his understanding. He didn't learn from their anhagot, their behavior, their ways. No, he figured, listen, I'm just going to learn on my own. I have books, the rabbi has books. I can read, the rabbi can read. So what's the difference between us? I'll just read more, try to do the best that I can. Whatever I understood, that's what it is. And he thinks that he can learn Torah that way and arrive at the right conclusion. And he thinks that just because he completed the Talmud Bavli, let's say, and he completed the Tanakh, let's say, and he completed some halachic books, let's say, and he completed a bunch of different books, he should be considered a Talmid Chacham. Says the Gemara, he's an Am Haaretz. Yeah, but he just read 500 books. Yes, he's an Am Haaretz. Why? Because he did not serve Torah scholars. What are they? Is they trying to make everybody their slaves? No, they're not even looking for anybody. It's that in order to become a Talmid Chacham, you have to serve Torah scholars. In fact, the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Daf Zayin, the 7th page, says, Gdola shimush talmidei chachamim milimudea. The servant of the Torah scholars is even greater than studying with them, than learning their Torah. Why? Because there are certain things that a person is going to learn from being next to that Talmid Chacham, next to that Torah scholar, that they're not going to learn from the books. But we'll get to that in a moment. So here we see that this person that Rav Nachman was talking about, it's not because he didn't learn the Talmud that made him a ignoramus, even though that was a missing ingredient in his list versus Rav Nachman's list, but rather because Rav Nachman had someone that he was learning with, his rabbi, and this other person apparently, the Chachamim say, he was a loner. He would learn on his own without necessarily double checking whether his conclusions were right or wrong. Now, even though he learned for many years, apparently he was still considered an Am Haaretz. Now, the Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, page 7a, brings a verse from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 50, verse 36, that says everything we just said in a single verse. Rabba Bar Chana said, why are the words of Torah compared to fire? As it says in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 29, Alo ko devarai be'esh ne'um Hashem. Is my word not like fire, says Hashem? This is to teach you, just as fire does not ignite from a single piece of wood, so too the words of Torah are not retained by someone who studies on his own without a partner or a rabbi to sharpen his mind. And this is in essence what Rav Yosef ber Chanina was saying when he was talking about the verse in Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 36, the one I was mentioning to you, where it says, Cherev el abadim v'noalu, a sword upon those who are alone, and they shall become fools. It says, what is this? What's the interpretation of this verse? It says, a sword upon the enemies of such Torah scholars, meaning a person becomes an enemy of himself if they study Torah on their own, without a study partner, without having a rabbi. And not only that the outcome of such study will be that the person will become foolish, tipesh. And not only that person will become sinful as well. Meaning he's learning Torah, but the outcome is that learning of his Torah will actually be the outcome. he's going to make more sins, and he's going to become stupider, not smarter. How could it be? How could it be that one could learn Torah and become stupider? About 150 years ago, one of the Gdolei Hador was known by the name of the Maharil Diskin. The Maharil Diskin was a Kodesh Kodashim, and during his time, there was someone that was known as a Torah scholar, but was also a recluse, where he studied Torah for 40 years without speaking to a single person. No rabbi, no talmidim, no students, no chavruta, nothing. He would just go, sit there by himself, with his Gemara, with his books, and learn day and night for 40 years. Once in a while, someone would recognize that he's there, dedicating himself, and it would give him some food, some money. But no one ever heard him say anything. No one ever saw anything he wrote. But people thought he was a Torah scholar. He's learning Torah for 40 years already. And one day he died. And when the Chevra Kadisha came to collect the body and purify it before the burial, they saw that he had a will. In his will, he requested that he be buried with all of the writings, the chidushim, the insights that he has written over the last 40 years of learning Torah, and that no one would look at them. Now, if this is Torah, you can't just bury it, because technically Torah doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't belong to him. Even though he wrote it, it doesn't belong to him. So they went to the Gdolei Hador, the Maharil Diskin, and they said, Kvod Harav, we have this guy, Torah scholar, 40 years, hasn't spoken to anybody. He has a sack the size of a bed full of things that he wrote over the last 40 years. And he specifically wrote he wants to be buried with everything that he wrote, and he doesn't want anyone to look at it. Are we allowed to do that? The Maharil Diskin says, no. The Torah is not his. First, I have to see it, to review what he wrote, to see if it's good Torah, if it's kosher. And in that case, we're not allowed to bury it. But if it's not good, we can bury it, do whatever we want. Bring it to me first. So they brought the Maharil Diskin, this huge sack full of writings, and the Maharil Diskin takes some of the writings in front of him, and he finds the first chidush, first insight from this person. And he's talking about the Jacob's ladder. And the guy writes, the scholar wrote, here we see that the Torah says that the angels were going up and down. And Rashi says that they were going up and down, but the question is, shouldn't it say that they go up and down and then back up? Why is it saying that they went up and down the ladder? Now, as a side note, Rashi answered that question. Had this Torah scholar read Rashi, he would have actually had the right answer, which is that the angels that were from the exile were going up, the angels from Israel were coming down, meaning it was two different sets of angels. But this guy, this silent Torah scholar, he came up with his own chidush. What was the chidush? Apparently the angels that went up had strong wings, and they were able to fly up. And the angels that went down had small wings, and therefore they couldn't go back up. As soon as the Maharil Diskin saw this, he says to the Chevra Kadisha, bury all of this as its own nonsense. Complete nonsense, it's not Torah at all. Now how could it be? This person has sat there and learned Torah for 40 years. We're talking about 4 decades. This is what you have after 4 decades? Angels with small wings? That's what you arrived at after 40 years? Yes. Why? Because he did not serve Talmidei Chachamim. He didn't go back and forth with Torah scholars. He did not go back with a rabbi. He did not go anywhere other than his own mind, simply assuming that whatever he thinks is correct. Now, this may sound familiar to some of you, because that's actually how the people of the church read the Torah. They read the Torah in such a fashion where they look at the verse or the translation of the verse, and more times than less, the manipulated translation of the verse in their King James Bible or their Quran or whatever other nonsensical book, man-made creation they have in front of them. And they look at it and they simply interpret things according to their logic, without having any connection to sages of the previous generation, needless to say, to sages at all, because every generation says something different from the one before it. There is no lineage, there's no history, there's no masoret like the Jewish people actually have. They simply allow everything to be according to their understanding. But to impress the crowd, the black Hebrew Israelites always have somebody that's in the background that usually you can't see their face reading the words, because maybe apparently the one that's the speaker only knows how to speak but he doesn't know how to read. And he reads the Bible really loud and makes sure that you can hear it. Makes it sound like as if he's reading it from the, I don't know whether it's Mount Sinai or the Tower of Babel, but nonetheless, he's reading it. And in the church of the Messianics, they'll read you some verse. Usually the most vague, convoluted things that are out there are the things that come out of their mouth, because the things that they read are simply not translatable in the common language without the assistance of the sages that have the Masoret that goes directly to the person that actually spoke those words, whether it be the prophet Isaiah or Zechariah or Moses himself, or if it's from Hashem. But needless to say, the way they look at everything is simply, the way I see it, the way I understand it, that's what it is. Very similar to this Am Haaretz, but just a little worse. Because the Am Haaretz, at least he read the writings of some of the sages, and he read the different parts of the Torah, and still he's considered an Am Haaretz, because he's missing that last ingredient of Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. Now we're going to get to why that's such a big deal in a moment, but we see here that the Am Haaretz, even though he learned, even though he's really Jewish, even though he has hundreds of books at his disposal that he read, not just buying them, still he's considered an ignoramus, because he's missing the last ingredient. But if you compare it to the people of the church, the Hebrew Israelites and the Messianic Jews and the Jews for Jesus and all the other people of the different nations, they're doing even less. There is no commentary. There's simply what I understand. Meaning that the removal from the truth is many steps further. Now, the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 74. Tells us something interesting. It says that there are 3 cardinal sins for the Jewish people. That if the Goyim, as they have in the past many times, tried to force a Jew to do one of these 3 things, the Jew has to die but not do them. if they tell him, either have sex with a person that you're forbidden to be with, whether it be your sister or some married woman that's not your wife, or any woman that's forbidden to you, or homosexuality, you have to die but not do it. If they tell you, you go into the colosseum that the Jewish people built after the Gentiles murdered and raped us as a part of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, to top it all off, they took tens of thousands of Jews. One recent number that I read was that there was somewhere around 114,000 Jews that were brought back to their countries to build the Colosseum. And in fact, some even have archaeological evidence that the material that was used to build the Colosseum and many of the things that you see in Rome were actually from Israel. Jerusalem nonetheless. And anyone that looks at the archaeology, you'll find that they celebrated the massacre of millions of Jews. They celebrated that they stole all of the tools of the Beit HaMikdash, the famous archaeological image of the Jewish people carrying the menorah, the gate of Titus that is still up to this day, 2,000 plus years later, and the Colosseum. But the Colosseum wasn't always a museum like it is today. The Colosseum was a place where, like just a few days ago, where there was a bunch of people playing in order to win a sport. In those days, it was a little bit different of a sport. Gladiators, where they would take the best fighters from the Roman army or the Greek army in their countries, and have them fight against the Jewish people. Sometimes with a weapon, sometimes without a weapon, sometimes with their hands tied behind their back, sometimes naked, most of the times naked, or sometimes not even against a Jew against a person, but rather Jews against lions. And that's what the Colosseum and the places like it in Greece and in Rome were made for. To use the Jewish people as entertainment. As everyone would clap as the Jewish people would be eaten up by these lions and tigers or cut up into pieces. So it's kind of unusual that we celebrate the so-called defeat of the Greeks, while just a few days ago there were many Jewish people, unfortunately, celebrating a bunch of Greek mentalities being expressed in a soccer match. And some people have been crying over it because their team didn't win. As pathetic as that sound. But nonetheless, the Gentiles have had their way throughout the generations. And at times they would try to force the Jews to simply destroy the Torah and go against it, especially the Greeks, where they said, listen, either have sexual intercourse with this person that you're forbidden to be with, or we'll kill you. Person has to die. Or they would have two Jews fight in the Colosseum. Either kill him or we'll kill you. A person has to die. A Jew has to die. He cannot kill his brother. He cannot kill anybody else just for the sake of saving his own life, even if it's a non-Jew. What makes your blood redder than his? Says the Torah. So here you have two cardinal sins. The third one is if the Gentiles tell you to worship one of their idols, whether it be Jesus, or they like to call him Yeshua, or how the Hebrew Israelites have created a new language and they call him shap, 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 or something relevant to that. If they think it's like Hebrew without vowels. And they tell you either come to church, come to temple, and worship our God, or just do it in the street, or just kiss the cross. when the truth is that the Holy Torah, the 5 books of Moses that they claim to believe in, both the Arab Muslims and non-Arab Muslims, as well as the Christians of all denominations, claim to believe the 5 books of Moses. And the very same 5 books of Moses says that if someone sinned and has to be hung, they hang him on a tree, but they immediately take him off and do not let this person hang the whole night, because it will be a desecration of God's name. But yet their entire religion represents something, an image of a person that they call Son of God and believe he's God. Their entire religion is symbolized by a person hanging on a cross, which the Holy Torah says this image in itself is a desecration of God. And they're going to tell you, go pray to him. Our Torah tells us, if they do that, you have to die. You cannot pray to him, even fake pray. Not allowed. Okay. Now the Gemara says, what if they tell you that, listen, we see that you guys have a custom. You Jews have a custom. The Gemara uses a hypothetical example. You Jews wear a certain color of shoelaces. Let's call it white. The Greeks like green. We want you to change your shoelace. Now, is this one of the cardinal sins? No, we just said what the cardinal sins are. But the Gemara says, you may have to die for the sake of that custom. Now, if a person learns this Gemara without having a Torah scholar, a rabbi to feed off of, to see what's going on here, they're going to arrive at a certain wrong conclusion. Either they're going to think you have to die for everything, simply you're just not going to live, or this is simply not relevant, and it's just exaggeration by the sages, or it's just something that is not related to our generation, or any generation, and in so many words, maybe there's even a mistake, God forbid, in the Oral Torah. Now, a person that doesn't read with someone that actually knows what's going on is going to arrive at a wrong conclusion. Why? Because you told me what the 3 cardinal sins are. How is a shoelace a cardinal sin? How is a custom a cardinal sin? So the Gemara says, yeah, maybe it's Shat Hashmad. Maybe it's a time where the Gentiles are simply trying to either kill us or us adapt to their laws. So a person that reads it by himself says, yeah, okay, but there is no law of shoelaces. Why should I die over a shoelace? Why should I die over shoes? Why should I die over a jacket? Why should I die over a headband? Why? So if a Gentile reads this, he says, see, these sages, they don't know what they're talking. They're crazy. They're telling their own people to die over a shoelace. If the ignoramus reads it, he's going to arrive. He's like, oh, listen, it's probably not relevant. Maybe it's the mistake. Maybe it's not halacha. But the truth is, this is halacha. One has to understand it, though. If we go a little further, we go into the Gemara, Masechet Bava Kama, on page 38a. The Gemara has a story of what happened years ago at the time of the control by the Romans. And the Gemara says that the Roman government once sent 2 officers to the sages of Israel, saying to them, teach us your Torah. We want to see what's in your Torah. You guys are willing to die for your Torah. You're learning it. You're teaching it. We want to know what's in your Torah. That's what the Caesar sent us here for. Now, of course, they couldn't say no, even though you're not allowed to teach Gentiles Torah. Still, they had to. Why? Because it was their life on the line. This is not one of the 3 cardinal sins. You have to do it. So, they sat there, they learned Torah for a period of time. A long period of time. After they've reviewed many parts of the Torah, the 2 Roman messengers, officers, said to the sages, we've carefully examined the entire Torah, and all of it is true. This is what the Romans are saying. All of what you have here is true. Except for one thing. One thing, this law that you have about the treatment of the ox that's owned by a Jew versus the ox that's owned by a Canaanite, that thing, that whole argument over there, which we're not going to get into right now, but that issue, that's a mistake. We don't really understand what's going on over here. Doesn't make any sense to us. However you consider this matter, it's difficult to understand. But we're not going to report this to the authorities. Meaning, even though this law that you have in your Torah is really, sounds like it's demeaning for the Gentile nations, because the treatment of your Jewish ox is better than the treatment of the Gentile ox, we're not going to report it. In so many words, saying to them that they like the Torah, they appreciate it, they respect it, and they're not going to go and say anything about it that's negative to the Caesar that could easily kill as many Jews as they want. So the Chachamim ask, they're looking at this Gemara, looking at this story, and the simple question is, wait, at this time that they're learning, the Oral Torah details of this ox, the Gentile ox, the Jewish ox, and the rest of what they learned is all orally being taught. It's not books. So yes, you have the 5 books of Moses, but the rest of the Torah at this time is still oral Torah, meaning that they're learning this from a Jewish sage. Why didn't you skip it? Obviously, it doesn't sound good to the Gentiles to listen to this, especially since even if you give them the explanation, they're not going to understand it because it has to do with sanctity, with Kedusha, which has nothing to do with the Gentiles. But nonetheless, why don't you skip it? Or better yet, just change the story, just say it's the same thing. I mean, there are literally endless amount of details in the Torah. These people learned it for a while. They had only one issue. Why don't you just appease them and either remove the story or tell them, no, you're right, it's actually the same? Why? Now, if a Gentile looked at this, he'd say, see, the Talmud hates non-Jews. If an Am Haaretz, ignoramus, looked at this, he'd be asking the questions that I just asked. Why didn't you change it? Why didn't you remove it? Meaning that without having an answer, there's no logical way to arrive at an answer. Now, the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 88b, says that until the generation of the Talmidim, the students of Shammai and Hillel, meaning after Shammai passed away And after Hillel passed away, they had 2 yeshivot. Each one had the yeshivot, and they had their scholars in there. Until that point, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, all the way until Shammai and Hillel, there was no machloket. There was no debates. Everything was as clear as day. The Rambam, in his introduction to the Mishnah, goes over the details of how the Torah transported from generation to generation, from who to who, how the details, and also when the debates began, and why there's even debates. Was there always debates? And all of those details. So the Gemara here on page 88 of Masechet Sanhedrin says that only when the rabbis were gone, and it was just the Talmidim, did the debates between the students of Shammai and Hillel begin. Why? Because although they studied Torah, they did not study it sufficiently because they were missing the ingredient of having a rabbi, of having their rabbi that would tell them whether their conclusion is right or wrong. Now, if a person looks at these details, they would arrive at a conclusion that it's not necessarily a good thing to have a rabbi teach somebody and explain to them, and even more so, confirm that whatever you're learning on your own and whatever conclusion you arrived is correct. But it's literally, there is no other way, because greater and smarter people than all of us have failed miserably because they lacked. Now, when it comes to the 3 cardinal sins, the Torah law is that a person has to die but not commit those 3 sins. But if the Gentiles are trying to cause Jews to simply leave the Torah, and even if they're not going to tell you, leave the Torah by go and to church, leave the Torah and go kill somebody. No, they simply tell you, just stop looking Jewish. Stop acting Jewish. Stop even the basic customs that you learned at your parents' house. Why? For the sake of not being as Jewish as you are. The Torah tells us that at that moment, when the Greeks and the Romans and whatever other enemy nation tries to destroy our Torah, our foundation, all of those things become the same thing as idolatry, murder, and other sex crimes. All of them become die but not sin. Because the premise behind their forcing us to change our customs is not because they don't like the custom per se, or that they lose out of us practicing that custom. The whole premise behind what they're doing is to simply make us less Jewish in order to remove us from the truth as far as possible, with an ultimate goal to get us to blurry the lines between the Jews and the Gentiles, where they can claim we are the Jewish people, not you. The same goes when it comes to the law of telling the Gentiles what's in the Torah and what's not. Can we lie to the Gentiles? Can we lie to the Goyim? Goyim is not a derogatory word, by the way. It simply means nations. And in the Torah, even the Jewish nation is considered Goyim. Goy Kadosh, a holy nation, is how Hashem refers to the Jewish people. Anti-Semites think that the word Goyim is negative in some way. But it simply shows that they don't know what it means. And they just assume. Needless to say, they don't understand what this Gemara is saying. When it says that the sages told those Gentiles the truth, even though they could have lied, according to logic. Even though they should have lied, according to logic. even though telling those people the truth actually put the entire nation at risk. Because if those Gentiles didn't like the Torah and simply had that one law of how you treat this ox that's owned by the Gentile versus the ox that's owned by a Jew differently, this one law can cause a massacre, a Holocaust. So in essence, you're putting the entire Jewish nation at risk just for this one law? Yes. Why? No one has the permission to change even a single letter or word in the written or the oral Torah. Not to the Jewish people, needless to say, not to the Gentiles. Yeah, but what about life risk? No. The only life risk there is if you change the Torah, even a word of it. Even a word of it. We're not allowed to lie or omit the truth, even if that means dying for that sake. A person that doesn't have a rabbi, doesn't have the right ideology, will simply have an impossible time understanding how could this be true? How could this be the case that we cannot simply skip this law? Now, the Gemara elaborates and tells us the answer that we want to hear. Why do we need this shimush? Why do we need this shimush? This servitude of the sages. Having a rabbi that's you're going to ask all your questions. Having someone you're going to double check all your conclusions even if you're studying on your own. Why? You see, the Gemara in Masechet Brachot says that the shimush is even greater than the study. Because if a person studies and he says, listen, I'm studying the rabbi's work, and I saw that in the Gemara or in the Yebia Omer or in the whatever book that they're reading, there are two rabbis that are discussing a certain topic and they arrive at a certain conclusion. One rabbi's conclusion was agreed upon by the majority of people. And one of those majority of people is, let's just call it, is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Another one is, let's say, Rabbi Meir. Another one is Abaye. There's, on the other side, you have others, but it's less. So the halacha is like this side. Now, if you read that, and you see that there is the majority of the sages agree on one side, and you see the names of the sages that agree, and that's what the law is. If you don't have someone that teaches you how to study, someone that teaches you the reasons behind everything, what are you going to arrive at? You're going to arrive at the conclusion that all of these people that are the majority, that in essence, that's the way the law is like them, according to their logic, according to their argument, all of them agreed for the same reason. And therefore, if I want to take something from there and apply it somewhere else, I could easily take, let's say, if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said this, he agreed that this is a yes, and I need him to say yes on something else. If he said yes here, then certainly I could use it over there. That's the way the person's logic works, the mentality works. And there lies the problem. If a person did not have shimush, did not have servitude, did not learn with the rabbis, then that means that this is the way they'll behave. Because in order for them to arrive at a different conclusion, they'll have to know why those rabbis chose what they chose. Because even though they all made the final choice as the same final choice here, it doesn't mean that they all made the final choice that's here for the same reason. And therefore, you cannot automatically use their decision here for whatever else you want to use it for. Because each one decided that they agree on this one thing, but many times they all agreed on this one thing, but for different reasons. And therefore you cannot just reapply it like copy and paste, like you do with the laws of the land and the laws of logic and the laws of the whatever you decide that is the rules that you want to apply to your life on a day-to-day basis. Because the system that each one of the sages had was not necessarily always the same. Their masoret, their traditions, and the way that they actually argued each argument was not necessarily always the same. And that's why when a person does not have a rabbi to actually confirm that their conclusion is correct, confirm that what they're following is correct, it is a certainty that they're going to arrive at the wrong conclusion, because they're simply going to just assume a lot of things that they cannot assume. Now, of course, you're going to have some morons that tell you, listen, you know what, I'm going to save myself all this headache and not have to deal with the sages and their different opinions. I'm simply going to go to the Mishnah, and I'm going to determine the law based on what the Mishnah says, because that's in essence the father of all Oral Torah. Now, although you're right that the Oral Torah is based on the teachings of the Mishnah, we don't paskin like the Mishnah. And it's not that we don't like the Mishnah, it's simply the law is not to do so. And in fact, when you do, the sages say that you're an idiot. You have a stamp of being a moron from the sages. Where is the stamp? Gemara, Masechet Sotah, page 22a, where the sages say, those who recite Mishnah are ruiners of the world. What does it mean? Does it enter your mind that they're really ruiners of the world and they cause harm to others? Ravina says, yes, they are the ruiners of the world, because they issue halachic rulings based on their knowledge of Mishnah without the benefit of Talmudic analysis. Meaning that a person that simply looks at the Mishnah and decides, oh, this is the law because this is what I understand from it, is exactly falling into the definition of the Amma Aretz that simply decided to conclude something based on their own logic without having sufficient information that can only come from studying with your rabbi, from studying from a Torah scholar, from studying with people that can double check and in fact confirm that what you're saying is right and what you're saying is wrong. And I can assure you that person is that is able to do it is not going to conclude the same way that you do more times than not. Why? Because once you have real Talmudic knowledge, you simply don't look at the world of Torah the same way. You don't look at the world period the same. Now, how is this all connected? How is this all connected to Chanukkah? As we said, the main thing that the Greeks wanted to do is destroy the Oral Torah. No different than the Hebrew Israelites, the Messianic Jews, the Jews for Jesus, and all of the enemies of the Torah, Jews and Gentiles alike that hate the Torah. They don't hate the written Torah, they hate the Oral Torah. When you ask them, how could it be that you don't believe and follow the Oral Torah when you have certain laws in the Torah that if you don't fulfill them, you get a death penalty? And there's no way to fulfill them without having the Oral Torah, such as observing Shabbat. The Torah says 12 times you have to observe Shabbat. What does that mean, observing Shabbat? What do you have guards outside your house with guns, with machetes? Observing the door? What are you observing exactly? What are the laws of Shabbat? Where are you going to learn them? If not for the Oral Torah. God says to Avraham Avinu, you have to do a Brit Milah. Cut the Orla. What is the Orla? What is the translation of the word orla? Is it orlat alev, the part of the heart, the finger, the eyes, toes? What is it? The last thing you would think, it's the male member. But the Brit Milah, if a person doesn't do it, they're making a sin every single second that they don't have a Brit Milah as a Jew. And there's no way to know what orla is without the Oral Torah. The mitzvah of tefillin. Put it on your head, put it on your arm. Multiple times in the Torah, Hashem obligates us to put the tefillin, these totafot, on your arm, on your head. What are these tefillin? What do you put? Do you put a tattoo? Do you put a wristband, a watch? What is this totafot? What goes on it? Can I put it in any color? Can I put my company logo on it? Can it be, in pink? Can I put rims on it? Can I deck it out with gold? What is it? Where are you going to learn those halachot? Where are you going to learn those laws? That if you don't fulfill those laws, you're not fulfilling the covenant of God. The Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, page 17a, says that people that sin with their body have no share of the world to come. Even after Mashiach comes, they're not going to be saved from Gehinnom. One of the examples the Gemara brings of a person that doesn't come out of Gehinnom is a person that doesn't put on tefillin. So it's a big deal not to put on tefillin. What if I just put a couple of boxes? I take a box of plastic, put it over here. Is that good? It qualifies tefillin? How would I know if I don't have the Oral Torah? One of the first laws that the Jewish people got is the sanctification of the month. God says to Moses on Mount Sinai that you have to sanctify the month when it looks like this. There's no pictures in the Torah. It's not a storybook for kids. What does it mean, looks like this? It means that God showed Moses what the Levana, what the moon looks like when it's considered the new moon. Where are you going to know that? Is there a verse in the Torah that tells you exactly what the moon looks like? No. Without the Oral Torah, it's impossible for you to fulfill this law that's the basic foundation of Judaism. Because without knowing when there's the renewal of the moon, there's no way for you to practice any of the holidays. Not Yom Kippur, not Rosh Hashanah, nothing. Why? Because you have to practice those holidays at specific times. It's not like Christianity where the holidays can change whenever they feel like it, whether it's leap year or not leap year. There are biblical verses that tell us exactly when those holidays have to be specific dates. Which means that the moon's renewal is the basic foundation of all Judaism. Without the Oral Torah, we would not know. When's the month start? When does it end? The Hebrew calendar is a world of difference from the Gregorian calendar. And the only way to know it is through the Oral Torah. And this is the Torah that the Gentiles have been trying very hard to destroy all these years. The Rambam, in the 3rd chapter of Hilchot Teshuva, in the 6th halakha, he tells us the following individuals do not have a portion of the world to come. Rather, their souls are cut off and they are judged for their great wickedness and sins forever. Meaning, whoever is in this category that the Rambam will elaborate on goes to Gehinnom and does not come out, ever. The world would end, the Mashiach would come, Gog Magog will be won by the Jewish people, the resurrection of the dead will follow thereafter, the Bet HaMikdash is built in the process, we live another 1,000 years in this world without a Yetzirah, without an evil inclination, both the righteous Jews and the righteous Gentiles. Meanwhile, This world eventually comes to an end, and then there's the eternal world thereafter. Meaning there's an end to this world. It's reached the Mashiach, the resurrection of the dead, the Bet HaMikdash, the 1,000 years of salvation in this world. But then it goes to the next chapter, something beyond our comprehension. The Gemara says, and the Rambam paskins, all of that will happen, and the people that are in this list, they're still going to be in Gehinnom. They're still going to be in purgatory until Hashem officially decides to destroy them altogether, which could be millions of years, because there's no concept of time that's anything relevant to what we have here in this world. Who are these people? The minim, the apikorsim, who denied the Torah, who denied the resurrection of the dead, the coming of the Mashiach, those who rebel against God, those who cause many to sin, those who separate themselves from the community, those who proudly commit sins in public, as Yoakim did, those who betray Jews to Gentile authorities, those who cast fear upon the people for reasons other than the service of God, murderers, slanderers, those who extend their foreskin in order not to appear circumcised. So he gives you a list, which ends up being a list of 24 individuals that commit sins so heinous that these people go to Gehinnom and never come out. The word minim is the first one that appeared. Halakha number 7 says, who are these minim? The minim are, they have to have one of these qualities. Either they say there's no God, atheists, or they accept the concept of a ruler, but they say that there's more than one, like Christians do. Or they accept that there is one master of the world, but he has a body or a form. Christians, or anyone that believes in the New Testament. Or one who maintains that he was not the sole first being or the creator of all existence, meaning that there was a different creator to the world. Or one who serves stars, constellations, or other entities, so that it will serve as an intermediary between him and the eternal Lord. Each of these 5 individuals is considered a min. What does this word mean? One of the sages, the Aruch, comes and elaborates. The word min comes from the original word ma'aminim. What are ma'aminim? Ma'aminim were what the Christians called themselves when they first started. What does it translate to? Ma'aminim is believers. What they still use to this day. Someone practicing anything connected to the New Testament falls under this description. They'll have no share of the world to come. Oh, I didn't know, I didn't this. You had plenty of time, and God is the God of the world, and he certainly knew that you existed. And certainly he gave you enough signs to discover the truth. And he gave you the intellect and the ability. Now, after this minim, we have the next one. Apikorsim. What is apikorsim? Individuals that are described as apikorsim are ones that deny the existence of prophecy, or simply say that there's no one that ever spoke to God, or can speak to God, or someone who disputes that prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, or someone who maintains that the creator of the world is not aware of the deeds that people do, anything that we do, or someone who denies the Torah in a way where they say that the Torah has some verses in it that are incorrect, or that have been changed, or not from God, like the Arabs do, the Muslims, or that Moses made up these statements himself. These are considered people that are denying the Torah. Or someone that denies the Torah's interpretation, meaning the oral law, the oral Torah, or disputes the sages, whether of the ones in previous generation or the ones of recent generations, as they are the spokesmen of the Torah, disputes their authority. Or someone that said that the Torah came from God but has been replaced, or even one mitzvah in it has been replaced or nullified, just like the Arabs and the Christians do, says the Rambam. So these are considered apikorsim. Now, we see here that the Rambam elaborates as far as the definition of these 24 types of sinners that lose their share of the world to come and go to Gehinnom forever. The common denominator of their denial of the oral Torah, the common denominator is that they disgrace the Torah sages, the Torah teachers. This is the common denominator across the board. Where did it all start? Greece. How? The word apikos comes from the name Epikos, who was a Greek philosopher that debated the Jewish people and went against the Torah, and was one of the leaders, let's say, against the oral Torah and against the fight against the Jewish people's existence, denying the divinity of the Torah, denying the authority of the Torah, and simply telling them that there's mistakes in it, such as eternal life, eternal soul, life after death cannot be. And from then on, the Jewish sages coined from his name Epikos, they coined the name apikos as a definition for anyone who denies different parts of the Torah and goes against the sages. So we see here, Rabotai, that whether it's a Jewish apikos or Gentile apikos, the enemies of the Torah have been enemies of the oral Torah, not the written Torah. The Torah says two things about them. One, they will continue fighting against the oral Torah tooth and nail, as part of their mission in the world, if you will. They'll continue fighting, and they'll hate the oral Torah more than anything in the world. The one thing that keeps the Jewish people Jewish. They'll continue fighting. It started with Chanukkah, over 2,000 years ago. The next level after that was the minim, the Christians, that were still fighting to this day. But the fight will change before Mashiach comes. As the Midrash Tanchuma says, those very same enemies of the Torah will one day come back in different colors, shapes, and sizes and tell you, we are the real Jews. But what do you mean? For the last 2,000 years you were murdering us. No, it wasn't us. But for the last 2,000 years you went against the Torah. No, that wasn't us. Yeah, but even right now you believe in the New Testament. No, we also believe in the Old Testament. Yeah, but till this day you hate the oral Torah. You're saying it's false, it's full of bad things. You hate the sages. And that's when they'll say, well, we don't hate all of them. We don't hate everything they say. if it fits our agenda. We'll use a Rabbi Eliezer ben Holkenos's midrash from 500 years ago and completely disregard everything he said at the time he lived and everything his student Rabbi Akiva said 2,000 years ago. Why? Because the 500 years ago midrash, it fits our cause. But what about everything they said 2,000 years ago? What about that? No, we didn't get to that. So how can you claim to be Jewish? How can you claim to be the real Israel without the Oral Torah? Don't let the truth, the facts, get in the way of a good story, get in the way of a good prophecy. We're in prophetic times. You're right. We are in prophetic times. And the prophecy is, Rabotai, that they're going to say that they're Jewish. And the numbers are going to increase. The numbers of haters, the numbers of enemies, the numbers that are simply going to do everything possible to continue the battle that's been going on for a couple of thousand years. Their goal is not necessarily to win the battle and for everyone to believe they're really Jews, because everyone knows what's true. But the goal is to blurry the lines. To blurry the lines and make it more difficult for the world to identify and recognize who's a real Jew, except for the Jews themselves. You see, Rabotai, in the last couple of thousand years, learning Torah was a way of life. Today, at times where there is a identity crisis among the nations that call themselves Jews too, despite their complete disconnect and animosity towards our Torah, today, learning Torah is not a way of life. Learning Torah is what we need to do to save our lives, to save our kids. And this is what the message that we need to learn from Chanukkah. Instead of going to the colosseum and watching a bunch of people kick a ball or throw a ball, learn where those sports began. Sparta and Colosseum, and all were different tools to torture the Jewish people. For you to celebrate in a place that celebrated the death of Jewish brothers and sisters, your grandparents, seems a little odd. The ambition to acquire as much material as possible was the Greek mentality. For a Jew to do the same seems a little odd. Why is it odd? Because you're celebrating Chanukkah. And Chanukkah is celebrating that we won. How did we win if we're still making the same mistakes? Learning the Oral Torah has never been as important as it is today. Each and every single person needs to know that it's not something you could just read a book or read a Talmud for dummies, like these idiots that try to debate the Jewish people do, where they say, oh, let me take out the Talmud, and they take one book. They don't realize that the Talmud has 60 Masechtot between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, and doesn't even count the Masechtot Ktanot and the Bareitot. They have no concept of what the Talmud really is. They have internet. They have a little book they bought at Barnes and Nobles. More times than not, wasn't even published by a Jewish publisher or even a Jewish author that translated it. But they think that since they have something that highlights a few bad statements, or at least what's perceived as bad statements, they know what the Talmud is. They know what Judaism is. And we're not going to change them. At least not most of them. And that's not the goal of this lecture. The goal is to answer the question, are we distinguishable enough from the nations that claim to be Jewish. Now, you can't say you're distinguishable because of the way you look, because there are Jews of all colors and sizes. You can't say that you're distinguishable because of the way you dress, because suits are worn on Wall Street, in business, and all over the world. And so is the Middle Eastern clothes. And so is every type of clothes. You can't say you're distinguishable because you live in Israel, because there are Gentiles that live in Israel too. You can't say you're distinguishable because you speak Hebrew, because there are plenty of Gentiles that speak Hebrew too. The only thing that would distinguish a person from those among the nations is their knowledge and their commitment to following the Oral Torah. Because the Oral Torah, that's Judaism. Because it covers everything, both the written and the oral. And so long as we remain ignorant of the Oral Torah, whether we're ignorant because we're simply not learning it, or worse yet, we're learning it without confirming that what we're learning is actually correct. We're simply deciding that what I read and what my brain understood, that must be the answer. Many times you'll see it's not. So it's important for a person to have a Talmid Chacham, a rabbi, that they will take as that is Da'at Torah. They have the knowledge, or at least the access to knowledge, or both, to let me know what the truth is here. Because I cannot trust myself. And I can tell you that the more a person commits to having not just additional Torah knowledge from the books, but additional Torah knowledge from that shimush we've been talking about the whole night, the further they are from being an Am Aretz, the closer they are to becoming a real Torah scholar, the closer they are to actually having the truth. And in fact, they'll see that perhaps one day they'll get to a point where they and their rabbi have been studying the same exact subject and arriving at the same exact conclusion, independent of each other, without even knowing that the other is studying the same thing. Perhaps this will be true for you too. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen. Where is Gehinnom in Halacha?
What'd you do to get in here, huh?
Evacuate Sector 5.
Not Midrashim, not Gemarot. We did that already.
People go to a place and they experience weird things. And sometimes they actually will see a character of some type. Well, where did that come from?
Once something is halacha, that's it. That's like Mount Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu, the end. There is no further discussion.
I don't know why that one chain is swinging back there.
The largest near-death experience study that has ever been conducted.
How much does the Torah mention the subject of Gehinnom and consequence?
Do you believe that angels, demons exist?
Holy shit, get out of here! Oh my god, dude!
What did the Hasidim actually say about punishment? Does Hasidut believe in Gehinnom or no?
What the hell is this? I've got bad chest pain.
Satan's Hollow is what it's called, the portal to hell.
Some people calling it an eye of fire, while others said it looked like the portal to hell opening up.
To be honest with you, to give this lecture is a nightmare. If it was up to me, I wouldn't. There's going to be some graphic detail.